The White Widow found him bathing and saw much more than water. It was early morning when the village began to wake up. The sun had barely started to rise, painting the sky with shades of gold and orange. Birds sang softly in the trees, and the cool morning air carried the faint smell of wet earth. In one quiet corner of this small village lived a man who preferred to be alone. People around him knew very little about him. He rarely spoke more than necessary, and his life seemed to move with the rhythm of the sunrise and sunset. Yet, beneath this calm exterior, his heart carried memories and burdens that no one could easily see. Every day, he followed a routine that he had built over many years. He woke up before the first rays of the sun, cleaned his small home, and prepared himself for the day. Sometimes, he would walk to the nearby stream, where the water flowed quietly between rocks and reeds. The villagers often saw him there, but they thought he was just another man enjoying the calm of nature. They did not know that this stream had become his place of peace, a place where he could let go of the weight he carried in silence. The man had not always lived alone. Many years ago, his life had been full of laughter and companionship, but one loss had changed everything. Over time, he learned to hide his feelings from everyone, wearing a mask of calmness even when his heart ached. People around him assumed he was content, but the truth was that he often felt lonely and misunderstood. His routine was not just a habit, it was a way to survive, a way to protect himself from the pain of being exposed. On this particular morning, he followed his usual steps. He walked slowly to the stream, carrying a small bucket and a towel. The world around him was still quiet. The water sparkled as the sunlight touched it, and he could see the reflection of the trees swaying gently in the breeze. He took a deep breath, letting the cool air fill his lungs, and for a moment he felt as if he could forget the rest of the world. Here, he was free, even if only for a little while. Unbeknownst to him, he was not completely alone this morning. A woman, known in the village as the White Widow, had been walking nearby. She had earned her unusual nickname because of her habit of wearing white, and because people knew little about her life. She had a calm presence, but her eyes seemed to notice everything, even the things that others overlooked. She moved silently along the path, enjoying the morning, and her curiosity led her closer to the stream. When she first saw him, she thought he was simply a man enjoying the water. But as she stopped and watched quietly from a distance, she realized that there was more to this moment than met the eye. The man moved with care, almost as if he was following a private ritual. He washed himself slowly, paying attention to every motion. But it was not his actions alone that caught her attention. It was the expression on his face, the quiet tension in his shoulders, the deep sighs that seemed to escape without thought. She sensed that this was a man carrying more than just physical fatigue. She could see the shadows of a life lived with pain, regret, and solitude. The White Widow stood there for a few moments, observing without intruding. She did not judge him, nor did she interrupt the peaceful scene. She simply watched, as if she had stumbled upon something sacred. The way he moved, the way he seemed absorbed in the water and his own thoughts, revealed a vulnerability that few ever noticed. And in that moment, she felt a strange connection, a silent understanding of someone whose life was hidden beneath the surface. The man, oblivious to her presence, continued his routine. He dipped the water over his hands, splashed it gently on his face, and let it run down his arms. Each motion seemed deliberate, almost meditative. He closed his eyes for a moment, and when he opened them, they held a mixture of sadness and peace. To an ordinary observer, it might have looked like a simple act of bathing, but to someone paying attention, it was clear that he was cleansing more than just his body. He was trying to wash away the burdens he carried, if only for a short time. As the minutes passed, the White Widow noticed small details. She saw the way he avoided the sharp stones in the stream, the careful way he moved around the reeds, and the way his eyes seemed to wander into the distance, as if searching for something he could not find. She realized that these quiet, simple moments were where his true self appeared, moments when he was not pretending or hiding. It fascinated her, and she felt a quiet respect for the man's resilience. Despite everything he had endured, he continued to find peace in small routines, and he continued to exist with dignity and quiet strength. The sound of water flowing over the rocks, mixed with the soft rustle of leaves in the breeze, created a gentle rhythm. It was almost as if the world had paused for a moment to allow him this solitude. The White Widow remained still, careful not to disturb him, yet her thoughts began to wander. She wondered about his past, the events that had shaped him and the stories he might never tell. Her curiosity was not intrusive. It was gentle, almost empathetic. She understood, perhaps from her own life experiences, that some people carry pain silently, and that being seen, even quietly, could be a rare and meaningful gift. Eventually, the man finished his ritual. He rinsed his face one last time, gathered his belongings, and sat by the edge of the stream to rest. The morning sunlight reflected off the water, casting shimmering patterns on his skin. For a moment, he closed his eyes and let the warmth of the sun touch him. It was a small comfort, but in his world, small comforts mattered greatly. He did not notice the White Widow still watching from behind a tree. He did not know that someone had seen not just his actions, but the essence of who he was, someone carrying memories, regrets, and quiet strength all at once. The White Widow stayed for a while longer, feeling a sense of peace from witnessing this private moment. She realized that sometimes life revealed itself in ordinary ways. People often searched for drama or excitement, but true understanding came from noticing the small, quiet moments, the things that most people overlooked. She felt grateful to have witnessed this, even silently. And though she did not know what the future would hold, she understood that this encounter, simple as it was, would leave a lasting impression on both their lives, even if they never spoke about it directly. As she turned to leave, the White Widow took one last look at the man by the stream. He sat quietly, lost in his thoughts, unaware that his vulnerability had been noticed. She walked away slowly, carrying with her a sense of respect and quiet admiration. Sometimes, life allowed people to see each other in ways that words could never capture. And in that fleeting morning moment, both the man and the White Widow had shared something unspoken, yet profoundly human. The village around them continued to wake, unaware of the quiet connection that had formed by the water. Life moved on with its usual rhythm, but something had changed. The man's routine remained the same, but he carried with him a sense of peace, however small. And the White Widow carried with her a deeper understanding of human strength and vulnerability. Both had glimpsed a truth that was often hidden in plain sight, the truth that every person carries more than what meets the eye, and that sometimes, seeing someone truly, even quietly, could be a transformative experience. After that quiet morning by the stream, life in the small village continued as usual. The man returned to his home, carrying the same bucket and towel he had used for his ritual, but something inside him felt slightly different. He could not explain it, yet a small sense of awareness lingered in his mind, as if the world had shifted in a subtle way. The routine that once felt comforting now seemed a little more meaningful, as though the morning had reminded him that moments of calm were rare treasures in a life full of quiet struggle. The White Widow, on her part, returned to her small, simple house. She moved with her usual grace and composure, yet her thoughts remained occupied by the man she had seen by the stream. She found herself replaying the moment over and over in her mind, not in a curious or judgmental way, but with a quiet fascination for someone who lived with such honesty in ordinary actions. She could not stop thinking about the way he had carried himself, the subtle tension in his movements, and the vulnerability that had shown itself in the most ordinary act of bathing. She wondered what had shaped him, what stories he carried silently in his heart, and what pain he had endured without ever speaking of it. In the days that followed, the man maintained his usual routine, visiting the stream and performing his morning ritual without interruption. Yet something had changed inside him, too. He had always considered himself alone by choice, believing that solitude protected him from disappointment. But now, for reasons he could not explain, he felt the presence of someone observing him, even from a distance. He did not feel fear or intrusion. Rather, it was a quiet acknowledgement that someone had noticed the unspoken pieces of his life. For the first time in many years, he felt seen, not for his actions, but for the essence of who he was. Life in the village carried on with its familiar rhythm. Children played near the riverbanks, their laughter echoing across the open fields. Farmers worked in the fields, tending to crops and livestock, their movements steady and practiced. People went about their business, exchanging greetings and casual chatter, yet no one noticed the small, invisible threads of connection forming by the stream. The white widow and the man had not spoken a word to each other, and yet their lives had subtly intersected. Sometimes it was these silent encounters that held the most weight, for they allowed understanding without the need for explanation. One afternoon, as the sun began to dip toward the horizon, the man lingered a little longer by the stream. He sat on a flat stone, watching the water ripple gently over smaller rocks. He thought about his past, the moments of happiness that had been fleeting, the disappointments that had left scars, and the decisions he had made to protect himself from further pain. The village knew little of his story, and that was exactly how he wanted it. He preferred to carry his memories quietly, away from the prying eyes of others. Yet in that reflective silence, he realized that perhaps some truths were waiting to be acknowledged, even if only to himself. Meanwhile, the white widow began to observe more closely, though always discreetly. She had learned to move quietly through the village, noticing small gestures, expressions, and details that most people overlooked. She saw the way he handled the bucket, the careful manner in which he avoided slipping on wet stones, and the soft exhale of relief whenever he finished washing himself. To an outsider, these details seemed ordinary, but to her, they spoke volumes. They told a story of a man who had endured hardships, who carried his memories with care, and who sought small moments of peace in a world that had often been unkind. Over time, their silent awareness of each other began to shape subtle changes in the man's life. He found himself paying more attention to the world around him, noticing small beauties that he had previously ignored, the way sunlight filtered through leaves, the scent of wet soil after rain, the gentle movement of birds in the early morning. He began to understand that life, even with its difficulties, held moments worth noticing and cherishing. And though he never spoke of it, the awareness that someone had observed him, not with judgment but with quiet attention, gave him a sense of quiet reassurance that he had not felt in years. The white widow, too, experienced subtle changes. Watching him had awakened something within her, a sense of empathy, an understanding that she had rarely allowed herself to feel. She realized that many people moved through life carrying invisible burdens, and that often the simplest acts of observation and acknowledgement could carry profound meaning. She did not seek to intervene or offer advice. She simply continued to watch, to notice, and to reflect. And in doing so, she found herself growing in patience, compassion, and quiet strength. One morning, a small accident at the stream created an unexpected moment. The man had slipped slightly on a wet stone, almost losing his balance, and instinctively reached for a nearby branch to steady himself. The movement was quick, natural, and unremarkable, yet the white widow, observing from a distance, felt a surge of concern. She realized that even in these moments he was human, not invincible, not always in control, but capable of adaptation and resilience. This realization deepened her respect for him, and she began to appreciate that the strength of a person was often found not in grand gestures, but in their quiet endurance. As the weeks passed, small interactions began to form. Though neither spoke directly, they occasionally exchanged glances from a distance. Sometimes he would nod briefly in acknowledgement, or offer a polite smile when their paths crossed near the stream. She, in turn, would respond with a quiet gesture of recognition, a subtle acknowledgement that they shared a mutual awareness. It was a silent language, built from observation and understanding, and it allowed them to connect without words. In a way, it was more profound than conversation, for it revealed a shared acknowledgement of life's hidden struggles. The man also began to notice changes within himself. The routine that had once been mechanical now carried a sense of purpose. He started to reflect on the choices he had made, the relationships he had neglected, and the moments of kindness he had overlooked. He realized that life was not solely about enduring hardship. It was also about embracing moments of clarity, connection, and beauty. And although he had spent years hiding from the world, he now understood that being seen, even quietly and without words, could offer a kind of healing he had never anticipated. The White Widow, observing from her usual vantage point, noticed these subtle changes. She saw the way he moved with slightly more ease, how his expression occasionally softened, and how he seemed to linger a little longer in moments of reflection. She understood that her quiet presence had made a difference, not because she had done anything overt, but because she had simply observed without judgment. Sometimes, witnessing another person's struggle and resilience was enough to create change, and she felt a quiet satisfaction in knowing that her silent acknowledgement had mattered. One afternoon, the man lingered longer than usual, watching the sun dip toward the horizon. The water reflected the orange and pink hues of the sky, creating a serene and almost magical atmosphere. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the sounds of the stream and the gentle rustle of leaves wash over him. He thought about his life, about the choices that had brought him to this quiet corner of the world, and about the small moments that had started to feel meaningful again. For the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of hope, a fragile, gentle hope that life still held beauty and connection. The White Widow watched from a distance, sensing the shift within him. She felt a quiet pride in the resilience of the human spirit, in the way people could endure hardship and still find moments of clarity, peace, and reflection. She understood that the man's journey was far from complete, that challenges and struggles still awaited him, but she also recognized the significance of these small steps, the small acknowledgments, the quiet observations, and the moments of reflection that gradually shaped life toward balance and understanding. By the end of part 2, both the man and the White Widow had begun to understand each other in ways words could not fully capture. They had established a silent connection, one built on observation, respect, and empathy. It was a connection that required patience and restraint, but it was no less profound for its subtlety. They were both learning to see more deeply, not just each other, but the world around them and the hidden strength within themselves. And although their journey was just beginning, the small, quiet moments they shared had already started to transform the way they perceived life, solitude, and the power of being truly seen. The days in the village were growing longer, and the sun seemed warmer than ever. Life continued its quiet rhythm, with farmers tending the fields, children laughing by the riverbanks, and villagers going about their simple routines. Yet, beneath this calm exterior, the man was beginning to feel a restlessness he could not ignore. The mornings by the stream, once peaceful, now brought unexpected questions into his mind. He found himself reflecting not only on the past but also on the future, on the choices he had made, the chances he had missed, and the people he had pushed away. It was as if the quiet routine had stirred something deeper, something he had kept buried for many years. The White Widow continued her silent observations. She noticed a subtle shift in him, a tension in his shoulders, a faraway look in his eyes, and moments when he seemed almost lost in thought. She sensed that the man was beginning to confront aspects of his life that he had long ignored. It was a difficult process, one that required him to face memories he had tried to forget, emotions he had suppressed, and regrets he had carefully hidden. The White Widow understood that change was rarely easy, and that the journey toward healing often brought discomfort before peace. She continued to watch quietly, offering no words, only the presence of someone who saw without judgment. One afternoon, the man arrived at the stream earlier than usual. The water sparkled under the sunlight, but he barely noticed it. His mind was occupied with the memories of the past, moments of failure, moments of loss, and moments when he had failed to act when he should have. He felt a surge of frustration, directed at himself for choices he could not undo. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to feel the weight of all that he had carried alone. He splashed water onto his face, not for cleanliness, but as a way to wake himself from the haze of memory and to remind himself that life continued, no matter how heavy the past might feel. The White Widow, standing at her usual distance, sensed the storm within him. She noticed the way his hands trembled slightly as he held the bucket, the way his eyes darkened with thoughts unspoken, and the quiet sighs that escaped from him without any sound. It was clear to her that he was at a turning point, facing a struggle that was both internal and profound. She understood that this was not the kind of struggle that could be solved by advice or encouragement. It was a battle that only he could face within himself. Yet her presence, silent and respectful, offered a strange comfort, as if simply being witnessed could lighten the weight of his solitude. Days passed, and the man's internal struggle grew more intense. He began to question the decisions that had shaped his life, the moments when he had chosen silence over speaking up, isolation over connection, and avoidance over courage. Each thought seemed to magnify the past, creating a web of regret and doubt. He struggled to reconcile the person he had been with the person he wanted to become. The quiet rituals at the stream, which had once brought peace, now reminded him of all the opportunities he had missed and all the relationships he had allowed to fade. It was a painful awakening, but one that he could not turn away from. The White Widow noticed the changes with a mixture of concern and understanding. She had witnessed the moments of reflection that often preceded growth and transformation. She saw that the man was beginning to confront truths he had long avoided, the fragility of life, the importance of self-acceptance, and the need to face emotions rather than hide from them. Her presence was steady, like a calm river that continued to flow regardless of the turbulence nearby. She did not intervene, but she remained a silent observer, aware that sometimes the greatest support came not from action, but from understanding and patience. One evening, the man stayed at the stream until the sun had almost disappeared behind the hills. The water reflected the fading light, turning golden and red, and he sat on a stone, staring at the ripples as they moved gently. His thoughts wandered to the people he had once loved and lost, the friendships that had faded, and the opportunities he had allowed to slip away. He felt a mix of sorrow and longing, emotions that had been buried under years of routine and quiet endurance. For the first time, he acknowledged the depth of his loneliness and the weight of unspoken regrets. The realization was painful, but also strangely liberating, for he could no longer pretend that everything was fine. The White Widow observed quietly from a distance, feeling a deep sense of empathy. She understood that confronting the past was necessary, even when it caused discomfort and sorrow. She had experienced loss and hardship in her own life, and she recognized the courage it took to face one's inner struggles honestly. She also knew that this confrontation was a turning point, a moment when the man could choose to continue hiding in silence or begin the difficult process of healing and self-acceptance. Her presence offered no answers, only the quiet reassurance that someone could see him without judgment, and that sometimes seeing itself was a powerful act of support. As the days turned into weeks, the man began to experiment with small changes in his routine. He would linger at the stream longer, allowing himself to reflect more deeply. He started to notice details he had overlooked before: the patterns of sunlight on the water, the movement of fish beneath the surface, and the gentle rustle of leaves in the wind. These small observations became a way for him to reconnect with life and with the present moment. Yet, each observation also reminded him of the past, creating a delicate balance between sorrow and awareness. He was learning that growth often involved sitting with discomfort, acknowledging it, and moving forward with intention. One morning, a particularly strong gust of wind swept through the trees near the stream, sending leaves swirling across the water. The man instinctively reached out to steady himself, and in that simple motion, he felt a strange mix of vulnerability and strength. It reminded him that life was unpredictable, that moments of instability were inevitable, and that courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision to continue despite it. He realized that he had spent years avoiding such moments, hiding behind routine and solitude, and that true strength required facing uncertainty directly. The awareness was both humbling and empowering, signaling a shift in his inner journey. The White Widow, watching silently, felt a subtle satisfaction at witnessing these moments of growth. She understood that change was rarely dramatic or immediate. It often unfolded slowly, like the ripples on the surface of the stream. Each small step the man took toward awareness, acceptance, and resilience was significant. She also realized that her role was not to guide or direct him, but to simply witness the process. Sometimes, the greatest impact came from quiet observation, from acknowledging someone's struggle without interfering, and from allowing them the space to confront their own truths. As the weeks progressed, the man began to confront not only the regrets of the past, but also the fears of the future. He reflected on the relationships he had neglected, the opportunities he had missed, and the life he had almost given up on. He recognized patterns in his behavior, habits that had kept him isolated and hesitant, and choices that had prevented him from embracing connection and vulnerability. The process was challenging, and at times, it felt overwhelming. Yet with each reflection, he gained clarity, understanding, and a growing sense of resilience. He was learning to accept himself, not perfectly, but honestly, and to embrace the complexities of his own life. The White Widow noticed these changes with a sense of quiet admiration. She saw a man gradually shedding the weight of silence and avoidance, learning to sit with his emotions, and slowly reclaiming a sense of agency over his own life. She recognized that the process was ongoing, that challenges and struggles would continue, but that the foundation for growth was being laid. The connection between them remained silent, yet profound, built on mutual awareness, respect, and the understanding that being seen could be transformative. One afternoon, the man reached a particularly poignant moment by the stream. He gazed into the water, watching his own reflection ripple and shift. For a long time, he had avoided truly looking at himself, his choices, his regrets, his vulnerabilities. But now, in the quiet presence of the stream and the subtle awareness of the White Widow, he allowed himself to confront the truth. He saw a man who had endured hardship, who had learned to survive, and who had carried solitude with quiet dignity. He also saw a man capable of growth, of change, and of embracing life more fully. It was a moment of self-recognition, painful yet liberating, marking a turning point in his journey. The White Widow observed this transformation quietly. She understood that true change was rarely visible in grand gestures. It often occurred in private, internal moments like this one. She felt a deep respect for the courage it took to face oneself honestly, to acknowledge past mistakes, and to embrace vulnerability. In that silent observation, she realized that her presence, though understated, had provided a subtle support, a reminder that someone could see him without judgment, and that recognition alone could inspire courage and reflection. By the end of Part 3, the man had entered a period of profound internal struggle and self-confrontation. He had begun to face the regrets, fears, and patterns that had long shaped his life, and he had started to explore the possibility of change and growth. The White Widow, though remaining in the background, had played a crucial role by quietly witnessing this process, offering an unspoken validation of his experience. Both were on the edge of transformation, he, ready to move forward into a life shaped by awareness and courage, and she, quietly inspired by the resilience and vulnerability of the human spirit. The days grew longer, and the air carried a gentle warmth that promised change. The man, who had spent so many years in quiet solitude, began to notice a shift within himself. The struggle he had endured, facing the memories, regrets, and fears that had accumulated over decades, was not easy. Some days he felt as if the weight of the past would overwhelm him completely. But gradually, he realized that the quiet observation of the White Widow and the peaceful mornings by the stream had helped him in ways he could not yet fully describe. Something inside him was starting to heal. It was not a sudden transformation. The man still felt sorrow and doubt, but those feelings had begun to lose their grip. Each morning when he walked to the stream, he noticed details he had once ignored: the bright reflection of sunlight on the water, the delicate movement of dragonflies over the surface, the gentle whisper of the wind through the leaves. These small observations, once unnoticed, now felt comforting and alive. He had started to understand that life was not only about enduring hardship, it was also about noticing beauty, feeling emotions, and accepting one's own human fragility. The White Widow continued her quiet presence. She did not interfere or speak, but she noticed the changes in him, subtle yet profound. His movements were steadier, his eyes brighter, and his posture more open to the world around him. It seemed that facing his own life honestly had allowed him to reclaim some strength he had forgotten he possessed. She felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that sometimes, simply witnessing another person's journey without judgment could contribute to their growth. She had not offered advice, nor had she tried to fix anything. She had only been there, and that alone had made a difference. One morning, the man lingered longer than usual at the stream. He took a seat on a flat rock and gazed at the water as it flowed past. The surface reflected the blue of the sky and the golden light of the rising sun. He thought about the journey he had undergone over the past weeks, how he had faced the loneliness he once accepted, how he had confronted regrets he had tried to ignore, and how he had begun to see the possibility of change. For the first time in a long while, he felt a spark of hope. It was not a loud or dramatic feeling. It was quiet, steady, and warm. The White Widow watched from a distance, her eyes filled with understanding. She realized that hope was not the absence of difficulty, but the decision to continue despite difficulty. The man had not erased his past, nor had he suddenly solved all his problems, but he had begun to accept them, to sit with them, and to learn from them. That, she knew, was the beginning of true resilience, and she felt a deep respect for him, not for what he had done, but for the courage he had shown simply by facing himself honestly. Over the next few days, small but significant changes began to appear in the man's life. He started helping neighbors with minor tasks, carrying firewood for an elderly woman, fixing a broken fence for a farmer, or sharing small words of encouragement with children who played by the river. These were not grand gestures, but each act reflected a shift in his heart. He was beginning to reconnect with the world around him, slowly and carefully. And though he did not speak of his personal struggles, his quiet presence and actions began to affect others positively. The villagers noticed, even if they did not know the reasons. The White Widow, observing these changes, felt a sense of gentle pride. She realized that transformation was rarely dramatic or immediate. It came in small steps, often invisible to the world, and it took time. The man had begun to understand that vulnerability and courage could coexist, that facing one's past did not make a person weak, but rather more human. She felt that the moments she had quietly witnessed, the early mornings by the stream, had contributed to this subtle transformation. It was a reminder that connection, even without words, could be powerful. One afternoon, the man noticed a small bird struggling to free itself from a tangle of reeds near the water. He bent down carefully and helped the bird escape. As it flew away, he felt a deep sense of satisfaction and connection with the living world around him. He realized that helping others, even in small ways, gave his life meaning and reminded him of the value of kindness. This was new to him. He had spent so many years focused only on survival and solitude that he had almost forgotten how good it felt to make a positive difference in someone else's life, even in small, quiet ways. The White Widow, from her usual vantage point, saw the interaction and smiled softly to herself. She understood that the man's journey was no longer just about himself. It was about understanding the world around him, about embracing the small joys, about noticing life even in its simplest forms. His reflection in the water was no longer just a man burdened by the past. It was a man beginning to live fully, with awareness and purpose. She felt a quiet warmth in knowing that she had been part of his journey, even in the smallest way. As the weeks passed, the man's routine by the stream continued, but it took on a new quality. Mornings were no longer solely about cleansing or reflection. They were about noticing life, observing its beauty, and quietly appreciating it. He began to talk to himself more openly, sometimes expressing thoughts he had never dared to share with anyone else. He admitted fears, regrets, and even hopes for the future. These private confessions were not spoken aloud to anyone, but the act of acknowledging them allowed him to release some of the heavy weight he had carried for so long. The White Widow continued to watch from a respectful distance. She recognized the importance of these private moments and understood that the man's transformation was something deeply personal. She did not intervene, nor did she offer words. She knew that his journey was his own, and that the role of an observer was simply to allow space for growth and reflection. Sometimes, the quietest support could have the most profound impact, and she felt honored to witness this slow, steady transformation. One evening, as the sun began to set behind the distant hills, the man stood at the edge of the stream and gazed at the reflection of the sky in the water. He felt a sense of clarity that had eluded him for decades. The memories of the past still lingered, but they no longer held him captive. He understood that life was a series of choices, and that even small decisions could lead to significant change. He felt a sense of peace, not because the past had disappeared, but because he had learned to accept it and carry it with him without being overwhelmed. The White Widow watched silently as the man took in the sunset. She felt a deep sense of satisfaction, knowing that he had reached a point of understanding and self-acceptance. She understood that the journey was ongoing, that challenges would continue to appear, and that life would not always be easy. But she also recognized that he had learned the most important lesson of all, that facing oneself, acknowledging one's vulnerabilities, and embracing life's beauty and complexity could lead to a quiet but profound strength. Over time, the man began to share small stories with neighbors, speaking of simple observations and experiences from his life. He did not share everything, but he offered pieces of himself that he had long hidden. People were surprised by the warmth and thoughtfulness he now expressed. They noticed the change in his demeanor, the quiet confidence that came from facing one's fears and embracing personal growth. The man realized that connection with others, even in small and meaningful ways, enriched his life and gave it new depth. The White Widow continued her quiet watch, knowing that her role had come to a natural pause. She had witnessed transformation, resilience, and quiet courage. She understood that her presence had been important, but that the man's growth was ultimately his own. The connection between them, though silent and subtle, had been meaningful. It was a reminder that human lives are often shaped by moments of observation, empathy, and understanding, and that even without words, people can profoundly affect each other. Finally, one morning, the man walked to the stream as he had done countless times before, but this time with a sense of calm assurance. He paused on a flat rock, letting the water ripple past his feet and breathed deeply, feeling fully present in the moment. He looked at his reflection in the water, and for the first time he smiled softly, not just as a surface gesture but from deep within. He had confronted his past, acknowledged his fears, and taken the first steps toward a life shaped by awareness, connection, and acceptance. The routine that had once been purely survival had become a source of insight, peace, and quiet joy. The White Widow, standing at her usual distance, watched him with a sense of quiet closure. She knew that their paths might not cross again in meaningful ways, yet the impact of their silent connection would remain. She had seen a man transform through self-reflection, courage, and quiet observation, and that was enough. She turned slowly and walked away, leaving the man to continue his life, now stronger, more aware, and ready to embrace the possibilities ahead. The village continued with its usual rhythm, but the story of the man by the stream had already been quietly rewritten. He had discovered that being truly seen, even without words, could change a life. He had learned that self-acceptance, reflection, and quiet courage were more valuable than any grand achievement. And he had realized that moments of vulnerability and honesty could lead to the deepest and most lasting transformations. Life, he understood now, was not about avoiding struggle, but about facing it, embracing it, and finding meaning in both the small and large moments that shape a human heart. And so, the man continued his life by the stream, carrying the lessons of the past, the hope of the present, and the quiet courage to face the future. Though the White Widow had left, her presence lingered as a reminder of the power of observation, empathy, and understanding. The man had been seen, truly seen, and that alone had changed him forever.